So we were very happy to organize this conference. And the idea is all the other aspects of Dubois are more or less known in France, more or less. But his contribution to sociology was not known at all, not only for question of translation, but also because probably some kind of ignorance of taking part, the interest for other features like social class. So, in a way, we are not here now to take sides on the debate was created by Aldon Morris, but I can say that, and some are in the audience, we were few of them, us, who used to lecture on Dubois in the 70s, when you were used to teach fieldwork. Even if we were always thought that Dubois was more making social survey in the tradition of that time. So, I think it's a new aspect of the interest in France of race. It's linked probably to evolution of the country itself, and also in the interest, and also the interest for the Chicago School, which is, Aldon Morris will show it, was in a way another way to study the same problem. So I'm very pleased to introduce Aldon Morris now, who just published his book, So-called Scholar Denied, which in a way was the opportunity to do this colloquium. I think it's very simple. So Aldon Morris is professor of sociology and African studies at Northwestern. I think his PhD was very interesting, especially I read it, on the civil rights, and especially the role of organization. And I think something French don't understand very well, the role of church. And so today he's going to talk about Dubois. And just recently, and the same thing to say, he was nominated president of the ASA, the American Sociological Association, which is an event really important. Thank you.
Well, first of all, good morning. And it is a real pleasure for me to participate in this conference on Du Bois here in Paris. And I really want to take this opportunity to thank Arnaud and the others for organizing this important conversation, and also, of course, for inviting me. And it's also an honor to share this panel with Professor Stefan Dufoy and my good friend of many years, Professor Elijah Anderson. So that in this presentation, I focus attention on the sociological canon, on curricular matters in sociology, on sociology and activism, and other related issues. However, my remarks are equally relevant to the social sciences. Indeed, Du Bois' scholarships span the social sciences, where he made important contributions in these different social sciences. But like sociology, the other social sciences marginalized and erased the scholarship of W.E.B. Du Bois for well over a century. But let me turn specifically to sociology. So that as sociologists, we seek to convey the most accurate knowledge to our colleagues, to students, and the general public regarding sociology, including its theories, its methods, substance, and of course, its history. This might come as a surprise to you, but despite best intentions, sociologists as well as other scholars are creatures of habit, and they are imprisoned by history and by their culture. Thus, it is useful to understand these barriers and employ reflexivity to try to help in transcending our blindnesses and inherent biases. So that in this conversation addressing sociology's canon, its methodologies, and its relationship between scholarship and activism, I will attempt to convey lessons that can be learned from the work and activism of the sociologist. And as you know, he was not just a sociologist, but many things, but I want to talk about him as a sociologist, that is W.E.B. Du Bois. Sociology, I think that sociologists need to be clear about their individual and collective histories. Then what therefore is the accepted origin story of sociology as a discipline, and about the sociologists who created the field. I think this is important because origin stories shape our historical identity and how we have evolved and influence who we will become in the future. Origin stories are institutionalized. So once they are institutionalized, they assume a taken for granted reality. Such accounts are seldom scrutinized for accuracy and authenticity. Origin stories crystallize into a profession's unquestioned social DNA. They operate as invisible switches, directing sociologists to see and experience themselves in a particular light. At the same time, origin stories obscure and erase important realities regarding who scholars actually have been historically and who they can become. So as sociologists, you probably know that we ought to be cognizant of class, race, gender, and power, and how these shape all aspects of our lived experiences and our work. These factors influence how sociologists think, how they theorize, and study the social world. Indeed, sociology is a social institution, as is all science. And like all social institutions, it is heavily influenced by the values, the norms, and history of the society in which it is embedded. Moreover, those social influences are prevalent, despite how objective and scientific we seek to be as scholars. Yet, sociologists often delude themselves into believing that their scientific training has somehow launched them into an antiseptic realm, whereby they escape the biases plaguing their neighbors. But I argue nothing could be further from the truth. A case in point is the construction of the sociological canon. Sociologists at the undergraduate, the graduate, and postgraduate levels have been taught the same sociological canon. That canon operates as the intellectual bedrock sociologists absorb, regurgitate as part of their rites of passage. The dominant sociological canon derives from the iconic writings of Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, and Max Weber. These scholars are recognized as we call them the Trinity. And this Trinity formulated the scholarly foci on which modern sociology rests. What do those constituting the Trinity have in common? Well, they are all white and male and European. They're theorizing privileged Western societies as the advanced nations of the world that birthed and sustained modernity, including capitalism. European sociologists were theorized as those that, European societies were theorized as those that constructed the path which all non-Western societies must travel if they are to become modern and civilized. Thus, theorizing by the Trinity developed a sociology anchored exclusively in the ideas of white European males. The American sociological canon did not diverge substantially from the European version. As European immigrants, white American sociologists readily accepted the European origin stories, although they differed over the European sociologist that they thought was most worthy as the founder of the discipline. As a result, American sociologists trace their intellectual lineage to European sociologists, and they followed their lead. Now, the accepted American origin story claims that scientific sociology in America began in the late 19th century at the University of Chicago and other elite white universities. These elite white male sociologists are credited with formulating the theories and empirical methods that founded modern American scientific sociology. This origin story has stood for well over a century. To be sure, it came to be a taken for granted reality. It is only recently that this century-old historical account has been challenged. Together, the European and American origin stories constitute the sociological canon. At the heart of that canon is the view that sociology's major intellectual preoccupations derives from Marx's analysis of social class and all of the struggles that these classes produce. From Durkheim's focus on the sources of social solidarity, and from Weber's obsession with bureaucratic rationality. While these theories purport to explain the totality of modernity, they rest on the assumption that Western society and its European inhabitants determined the future because they were, in fact, superior to all other societies, and indeed to all other races, especially non-white races. Yet the basic question that we must ask is, how did this sociological canon originate? And why has it held sway for nearly 2 centuries? So then, for answers, we can turn to sociologists who have investigated the canon formation process. From this perspective, the findings are clear. Canons are socially constructed. Canonical ideas are shaped by existing material and intellectual interests rooted in power arrangements. So that following sociologists of the canon like Gurminder Bhamra, it is clear that the canon formation process has always been political. Other scholars have noted that what is perceived as genius or greatness is itself culturally defined, and therefore is an insufficient explanation for the elevation of certain ideas to the classical pantheon. Therefore, previous scholars who had biases and particular interests elevated certain works to the canon while excluding others. Thus, the sociological canon was not birthed by immaculate conception. It did not descend from sociological heavens untouched by earthly bound scholars. Our white forebears performed the intellectual and political work that birthed the canon. So then the once unthinkable becomes possible. Given the socially constructed nature of the canon formation process, contemporary sociologists, I would argue other social scientists as well, are fully capable of reconfiguring the classic canon. Indeed, we need to interrogate why the canon has only included ideas formulated by elite white men, and why their societies have served as the universal benchmark to theorize about all other societies. So this brings me to W.E.B. Du Bois. Why has Du Bois' sociology been marginalized and erased rather than elevated to canonical status? Well, Du Bois was Black. During the late 19th century, whites considered blacks to be inferior. Because of this assumed inferiority, Du Bois's work was not considered competent scholarship to be taught and to be published in prestigious venues. This exclusionary phenomenon, I will say to you, is still present given the systematic underrepresentation of women and people of color of all genders in our discipline's leading scholarly journals. Likewise, in Du Bois's day, irrespective of merit, racial discrimination prevented Du Bois's work from achieving canonical status. But also, institutional prestige matters. Institutional prestige has always served as a crucial gateway to the sociological canon. Thus, appointments at prestigious white universities have been paramount for the nomination of scholarship deemed worthy of canonization. So then, by definition, negative prestige prevented Du Bois's scholarship from being considered for canonization. Du Bois and all, this is in America, Du Bois and all black sociologists, including E. Franklin Frazier, Oliver Cox, and Charles Johnson, could only hold appointments at low prestige, under-resourced black universities. We call them HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. These institutions were automatically labeled and treated as inferior. Thus, institutional status doomed Du Bois's scholarship from being elevated to canonization. Although he was the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard, he was one of the first scholars to come to Germany and be taught in the German Historical School of Economics under people like Schmoller and Wagner. But still, he could not, in the early 20th century, be appointed to a professorship at places like Harvard or Pennsylvania or Chicago. Thus, institutional status doomed Du Bois's scholarship from being elevated to canonization. Because scholarship is influenced by power, Du Bois's scholarship was erased also because it challenged America's status quo. This challenge contrasted sharply with the white American founders of the discipline, whose sociology tended to justify racial inequality as seeing it as natural, or by arguing that black people deserve their status at the bottom of American social order because of their meager talents, given their biological or cultural inferiority. Du Bois's sociology presented empirical data demonstrating that all races were equal. Now, you know, we talk and take for granted that race is a social construct, but this is a relatively new idea, and there's been much research that's been done that suggests that although social scientists argue, many of them argue that race is socially constructed, that even they and most people still believe that race is rooted in biology. So at any rate then, Du Bois's sociology presented empirical data demonstrating that all races were equal. He even advanced the radical hypothesis that black people were human. Du Bois did so knowing fully well the costs associated with this novel claim. In his classic Black Reconstruction, Du Bois wrote, quote, "I'm going to tell this story as though Negroes were ordinary human beings, realizing that this attitude will from the first seriously curtail my audience." End quote. So then Du Bois's argument regarding racial inequality that directly opposed those of white scholars who clung to the deeply held beliefs that blacks were inferior, either biologically or culturally or both. Such inferiority, they argued, relegated blacks to the bottom of America's social order. So then, given Du Bois's racial postulate, he developed an entirely different analysis of the black community and of black agency. In so doing, Du Bois's sociology of modernity differed theoretically from white sociology. While Du Bois did not dismiss class struggle, social solidarity, and bureaucratic rationality as important drivers of modernity, these factors for him were insufficient explanations of modernity. Du Bois's matrix of causation, in his matrix of causation, racial exploitation was a fundamental cause of modernity and of capitalism. He demonstrated that modernity and capitalism sprung from the African slave trade, centuries of slave labor, colonialism, and the erection of European empires on the backs of slaves. So then, unlike his contemporaries, that is Durkheim and Weber, and his predecessor Marx, Du Bois explicitly theorized the interactions among racism, colonialism, slavery, Western empire building, and capitalist development itself. He established the theory that modernity developed from global color lines. And I think this is very important, that when Du Bois talked about the color line, it was not simply about the color line in America, the black-white color line, but it was about global color lines that belted humanity and produced worldwide race stratification. Thus, racial dynamics constituted a defining cornerstone of modernity for Du Bois. In this view, racial and capitalist dominations were structurally linked phenomena. Therefore, to usher in social equality, a coterminous race and class revolution would be required to dismantle the common enemy of all races, of all workers, that is, the system of racialized capitalism. So then, as Julian Gold concluded, Du Bois' scholarship was also excluded from the canon because it brought forth radical, dangerous ideas. Now, early in the 20th century, there arose among sociologists a split between qualitative and quantitative methods. This split endured, leaving in its wake divided sociology departments. For many quantitative scholars, sociologists would not be embraced as real scientists without using quantitative methods like the natural scientists. Qualitative sociologists, on the other hand, tended to believe that humans cannot be understood as if they were molecules, atoms, or other forms of inorganic matter. Because human behavior is imbued with meanings and symbols, qualitative methods, that is, participant observation, interviews, ethnography, and field work, they were needed to penetrate layers of meaning that constituted human behavior. So then what happened is that methodologically, sociologists grouped themselves into two warring camps, that is, quantitative and qualitative, rigidly defending their respective methods. But in contrast, Du Bois used both qualitative and quantitative methods As an advocate of multi-methods, Du Bois never engaged in debates about which methods were superior or more scientific. He advocated the use of the best available methods to study social phenomena. Moreover, for Du Bois, multi-methods served as cross-checks, correcting errors produced by any single method. It's what we call methodological triangulation today. So if sociology had adopted Du Bois's methodological approach, many needless, silly divisions could have been avoided, making sociology a more cohesive and civil discipline. Now, there is debate over whether sociology should be a pure science or whether it can promote social change and activism. As with the methodological divide, these debates assume an either-or character. Those advocating that sociology should remain a pure science argue that activism derails sociology's mission as objective science. Those advocating sociology as a science of liberation believe that political involvement increases the scientific power of sociology because such engagements render sociology relevant as a discipline and prevents it from descending into irrelevancy. Thus, rigorously accurate sociology could make the difference between defeat and success of liberation movements. Now, Du Bois clearly embraced the scientific mission of sociology. He declared, quote, "Students must be careful to insist that science as such, be it physics, chemistry, psychology, or sociology, has but one simple aim, the discovery of truth. Its results lie open for the use of all men, merchants, physicians, men of letters, and philanthropists. But the aim of science itself is simple truth. Any attempt to give it a double aim, to make social reform the most immediate instead of the immediate object of a search for truth, will inevitably tend to defeat both objects." End quote. Yet, Du Bois also thought that a sociology that failed to be politically engaged was a dry as dust sociology. In his view, activism uninformed by scholarship would surely fail. The sociology for him were twin actors needing each other. So that Du Bois used scholarship to inform his activism in major movements throughout the 20th century. This intermarriage of science and activism led Martin Luther King Jr. to conclude, quote, speaking of Du Bois, "It was never possible to know where the scholar Du Bois ended and the organizer Du Bois began. The two qualities in him were a single, unified force," end quote. Thus, Du Bois rejected false dichotomies between science and activism, demonstrating that the two can engage in mutually reinforcing relationships. So then let me conclude by saying that given Du Bois's pioneering theories, methodological innovations, and the bridging of scholarship and social change, the time is right to canonize Du Bois's path-breaking body of scholarly work. To do so would accomplish a number of crucial goals. Canonization would guarantee that the majority of professional sociologists would cease having impoverished imaginations, uninformed by Du Boisian sociology. The sociological curricula would receive a boost of intellectual and informative revitalization by including Du Bois's scholarship. The sociological imagination of undergraduate and graduate students would be greatly expanded by encountering Du Bois's sociology. And canonization would hasten the day, that is, canonization of Du Bois's scholarship, would hasten the day when sociology truly burst from its Western confines and embrace a global sociology that is necessary for understanding postmodernity. So then, the only question following Spike Lee is whether sociologists will finally do the right thing. That is, canonize the work of W.E.B.